America is weird. So weird, in fact, that somebody made an entire iceberg chart about all the weird and mysterious things that have happened within the 50 states. From cryptids and aliens to true crime and unexplained phenomena, prepare to hear about just how weird the USA truly is. Bigfoot. Perhaps the quintessential American legend, Bigfoot or Sasquatch is a large humanoid cryptid said to live in forests. The myth extends all the way back into Native American legends, and reports of the creature are incredibly common. More than a simple cryptid, there are many people who genuinely believe the species exists and that they can be studied scientifically. Roswell Incident. The Roswell incident is probably the most famous UFO encounter of all time. In 1947, debris was uncovered in Roswell, New Mexico, leading many to believe the military in the area had recovered a crashed alien spaceship. Although the debris was actually of a military balloon, the story of the Roswell crash has acted as the spawn of countless other alien stories and has cemented itself as a staple in American folklore. Carhenge. Carhenge is a replica of England's Stonehenge in Alliance, Nebraska. Instead of large standing stones, the monument uses vintage American cars completely spray-painted gray. The monument was finished in 1987 by Jim Reinders. A visitor center was added in 2006 to accommodate tourists. D.B. Cooper. D.B. Cooper was an unidentified man who hijacked a Boeing 727 aircraft in November of 1971. Cooper, holding the crew hostage with a fake bomb, demanded $200,000 in ransom and 4 parachutes. After refueling and receiving the ransom, the plane flew to Mexico City. During the flight, he parachuted over the woods of Washington State. It is speculated Cooper did not survive the jump from the plane, although no conclusive evidence was ever found. The case remains unsolved to this day and stands as one of the most famous crime mysteries in American history. Hatfield-McCoy feud. The Hatfield-McCoy feud is the long-lasting rivalry between two families that live along the West Virginia and Kentucky border. The feud reached its peak on New Year's of 1888 when members of the Hatfield clan surrounded the McCoy cabin and opened fire on the family and then set it on fire. In the 1970s, the two families played a special episode of Family Feud in which the McCoy family won, but the Hatfields actually won more money. Kilroy was here. Kilroy was here as a piece of graffiti art that became popular among GIs in the Second World War. Acting as a kind of meme, the art usually depicted a bald man with a large nose peeking over a wall with the text "Kilroy was here" next to it. The figure was initially a British character known as Mr. Chad, and usually appeared with a short text about shortages of food and rations. It is thought to have originated from a shipyard inspector named James Kilroy, who originally wrote "Kilroy was here" on equipment to prove it was inspected. The meme became so popular and so representative of American GIs that it is engraved in stone at the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. Hobo Code. Hobo Code is a special hieroglyphic language from the 1800s and early 1900s used by wandering laborers who call themselves hobos. The codes were used to show things such as places they can sleep or find work, or unsafe places to avoid. Winchester Mystery House. The Winchester Mystery House was built by Sarah Winchester, widow of firearms magnate William Winchester. The building was built with a maze-like structure to confuse spirits and keep them from harming her. There are doors in the house that open to nothing, or staircases that end at a ceiling. The buildings also feature 13 bedrooms, bathrooms, and certain rooms have 13 windows. The house is now a tourist attraction, and many visitors have claimed to experience cold spots, hear footsteps whispering, or the feeling of being watched. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison is the current title holder for the shortest U.S. presidency at only 1 month. He was also the last president born as a British subject in the 13 colonies, as well as the first president to die in office. Harrison was the 9th president of the United States, running as part of the Whig Party, serving as the party's first presidential representative. He took his oath on March 4th, 1841, on a cold and wet day, and for the next month would continue to bear the cold weather without appropriate clothing. Harrison became ill at the end of March with pneumonia, severe diarrhea, and a severe cold. He passed on April 4th, 1 month after taking the presidency. Legend of the Octopus. The legend of the octopus is a sports tradition from the Detroit Red Wings, a National Hockey League team. The spectacle, which includes throwing dead octopi into the rink, started in April of 1942, when two brothers did exactly that. The 8 arms of the octopus were supposed to represent the amount of wins the team needed to win the Stanley Cup. Emperor Norton. Emperor Norton was a businessman from South Africa who lived in San Francisco in the 1850s. He had a period of business prosperity in the 40s that he mismanaged, which led him to declare bankruptcy in 1856. In 1859, he issued a manifesto to the citizens of the United States as a paid ad in the San Francisco Daily Evening Bulletin. In the next coming months, he delivered another one declaring himself Emperor of the United States. He issued decrees such as abolishing Congress and having states send representatives to Musical Hall in San Francisco. Kentucky Meat Shower. The Kentucky Meat Shower occurred in March of 1876, where chunks of red meat fell from the sky. The meat was identified to be either beef, lamb, or deer, but other chunks were thought to be lung tissue from a horse or a human infant. There's also a theory that it was vomit from a vulture, which still contained remnants of its last meal. In 2024, the Bath County History Museum opened an exhibit showcasing a preserved piece of meat from the event. Dorothy Gibson. Dorothy Gibson was an American actress who survived the sinking of the Titanic. Gibson was returning from a vacation in Italy, and she managed to make it to a lifeboat on the night of the Titanic's sinking. She then went to star in a movie titled Saved from the Titanic, which was released in 1912. It was based on her story and experience from the disaster and released only a month after the boat sank. Apparently, it was actually Gibson herself that pitched the film to her manager, appearing in the exact same clothing she wore on the boat. All copies of the film were destroyed in a fire at the studio where they were kept, making this historic Titanic-inspired film lost media. Bobby Leach. Bobby Leach was a British performer from the Barnum and Bailey Circus. He was known for making the dive from a 150-foot tall platform into a 5-foot deep pool. He was also the second person to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel and survive. He accomplished the feat in 1911, 10 years after the first attempt by Annie Taylor. Where Taylor used a wooden barrel, Leach used a steel barrel, which resulted in him having 2 broken kneecaps and a fractured jaw. North Hollywood Shootout. The North Hollywood Shootout was a confrontation between heavily armed bank robbers and police in 1997. The standoff lasted 44 minutes, with more than 2,000 rounds of ammunition exchanged between the 2 robbers and the police department. One robber died of a self-inflicted gun wound, and the other of blood loss after more than 20 rounds ended up in his leg. This shootout has been used to justify arming police nationwide with semi-automatic rifles, as it seemed the police armed with 9mm pistols were not well equipped to deal with the robbers' arsenal of assault rifles. Howard Dean Scream. Howard Dean was a Vermont governor running for president in 2004. During a rally in Iowa, he gave a speech which included an iconic scream of excitement. Just before the rally, he lost the candidacy in Iowa to John Kerry. Within 4 days, national news had mocked the scream, and the political gaffe is often credited as the reason he lost the candidacy. The scream also made its way into a scene in AMC's Breaking Bad because the editors thought it was so funny. L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard was an American author who wrote science fiction and fantasy novels. He also founded Scientology in 1952, of which he was the leader until 1986. Hubbard wrote a book titled Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health. This book was a combination of personal experience and Eastern philosophy, and it claimed to give the ability to become clear, or someone who no longer has a reactive mind and is free from negative effects to be produced from having such a mind. Clear people can use their mental energy to think clearly, even when faced with situations that cause difficulty. The book was denounced as pseudoscience, but was transformed into Book 1 in the newly formed religion of Scientology. Roanoke Colony disappearance. The Roanoke Colony is probably the first ever American mystery. The colony was the first permanent English settlement in North America and was founded in 1585. There were approximately 120 colonists. When a relief ship full of supplies arrived in 1590, the colony had completely disappeared. Left behind was the word Croatoan on a stake wall around the settlement. It was originally thought that the settlement had relocated to Croatoan Island, but the sailors never made it to the island to verify. Some theories believe that the colony assimilated into the local Native American tribes, were massacred by the Spanish groups nearby, or simply moved and were never discovered. However, nothing has ever been confirmed, and the Roanoke colony remains the lost colony. What's the frequency, Kenneth? In 1986, a CBS Evening News anchor named Dan Rather was walking to his apartment in Manhattan one night when he was attacked by two men on Park Avenue, with one of the men repeating, "Kenneth, what is the frequency?" The nonsensical phrase confused Rather, and no motive was ever discovered, nor was the man caught. However, in 1994, a man named William Tager was arrested for killing a stagehand, apparently trying to discover the frequency that he believed NBC used to broadcast signals into his brain. It was determined by investigators that Tager was also the man that attacked Rather in 1986. Zoot Suit Riots. Zoot suits were worn by Harlem dancers as loose clothes in order to allow for better movement. Because of where they were worn and their popularity among minority groups, the zoot suit gained a racist reputation. When World War II had begun, cotton rations were supposed to limit the amount of material used in clothing. However, bootleg clothers would still make zoot suits, and many saw it as unpatriotic. Eventually, the tensions led to a clash between uniformed policemen and Mexican-American youths, resulting in the beating of a U.S. sailor. Partly in retaliation, on the evening of June 3rd, about 50 sailors from the local U.S. Naval Reserve Armory marched through downtown Los Angeles carrying clubs and other crude weapons, attacking anyone seen wearing a zoot suit or other racially identified clothing. The days after, mobs in Los Angeles started full-scale riots. Service members were stripping zoot suit wearers, and police would arrest the victims, not the service members. Eventually, it was turned away from zoot suit wearers and was just an excuse to beat minorities in public. The only reason it stopped is because the military members were barred from leaving the barracks. Boston Molasses Flood. On January 15, 1919, in the North End neighborhood of Boston, a large storage tank filled with 2.3 million gallons of molasses, weighing approximately 12,000 metric tons, burst and flooded the streets of Boston at an estimated 35 miles per hour, killing 21 and injuring 150 people. Bostonians reported to smell molasses on hot summer days even decades after the incident. William Walker. William Walker was an American lawyer and mercenary who used the doctrine of manifest destiny to justify unauthorized military expeditions into Mexico and Central America in order to establish colonies. He created a Republic of Sonora, which claimed Lower California and Sonora. Eventually, he was forced back to the United States. He continued his filibustering by eventually invading Nicaragua, where he became president in a fraudulent election in July of 1856. Here, he controlled a vital trade route through the San Juan River, which was used for travel between New York and San Francisco. He again returned to America, this time surrendering to the United States Navy. His third adventure led him to Honduras, which led to his demise as he was imprisoned by the British Navy and turned over to the Honduran authorities, who ultimately executed him. Robbers Cave Experiment. The Robbers Cave Experiment, conducted in the 1950s, studied intergroup conflicts and cooperation among 22 boys in Oklahoma. It has become one of the most cited studies in social psychology. The boys, all white Protestants with two-parent backgrounds, were divided into two groups, with efforts to balance physical, mental, and social talents. The groups were also unaware of the other's existence. The groups were then sent to Robbers Cave State Park, disguised as a camp, with researchers as counselors. In the first week, the groups were kept separate, encouraged to bond and develop attachments within their group. The two groups created their own names, the Eagles and the Rattlers. The groups were then put against each other in head-to-head games, such as tug of war, with prizes for the winners. Eventually, the division turned from banter to actual attacks, including stealing food and ransacking the other's cabins. The final step was to now resolve these conflicts. The boys were put in situations where they were forced to make compromises with the other group, such as picking a movie for the movie night, or, more critically, the need for water. The experiment has been used to determine the reasons behind conflict and resolution, but has also been criticized for how unrealistic the situation was. MK Ultra. MK Ultra was an illegal human experimentation program designed and undertaken by the CIA to develop procedures and identify drugs that could be used during interrogations to weaken individuals and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. Beginning in 1953, MK Ultra used numerous methods to manipulate its subjects, mental states, and brain functions, such as the covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs, especially LSD, and other chemicals without the subject's consent. Additionally, other methods beyond chemical compounds were used, including electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of torture. The project attempted to produce a perfect truth serum for interrogating suspected Soviet spies during the Cold War and to explore other possibilities of mind control. Subproject 54 was the Navy's top-secret perfect concussion program, which was supposed to use suboral frequency blasts to erase memory. The program was never carried out. Most MK Ultra records were destroyed in 1973 by order of CIA Director Richard Helms, so it has been difficult for investigators to gain a complete understanding of the more than 150 funded research subprojects sponsored by MK Ultra and related CIA programs. Edgar Allan Poe toaster. No, this is not referring to a kitchen appliance that cooks bread. Instead, this is referring to a masked man who would visit Edgar Allan Poe's grave every year for his birthday. He would leave 3 red roses and a bottle of cognac on his grave. The tradition started in 1949, which was 100 years after the author's death. The toaster would come between midnight and 6 a.m., wearing an all-black outfit with a white scarf and a big hat. He would leave notes that would be collected by Jeff Jerome, the curator of the Poe house. In 1999, a note was left saying the original toaster had passed away, and the new toaster was the son, who continued the tradition, just not as seriously. The new toaster would show up in street clothes, and the notes he would leave seemed to have less meaning. Eventually, in 2009, the tradition stopped. Every once in a while, fake toasters would appear, but the Poe Society generally considers them as copycats hoping to gain recognition. In 2016, Jeff Jerome sanctioned a comeback for the toaster, and he held a public audition, but the eventual toaster remained anonymous. Drapetomania. Drapetomania is a proposed mental illness that was described as the cause for enslaved Americans fleeing captivity. Samuel A. Cartwright, the man behind the disease, believed that slavery was an improvement to their lives and that the only reason someone would want to flee is mental illness. Cartwright's article was mocked in the North, with Frederick Law Olmsted citing that white indentured servants also flee, arguing that if the disease was real, it was actually of European origin. The illness was, of course, deemed as pseudoscience. The term is now used to describe impulsive wandering, but is still not seen as a real mental illness. Charles Guiteau. Everyone knows Lee Harvey Oswald and John Wilkes Booth, both famous for assassinating the president. Charles Guiteau is also part of this group. Guiteau assassinated James A. Garfield, the 20th President of the United States. He was a failed lawyer who published a book called The Truth, which has been identified to be mostly plagiarized, and he believed that his actions were divinely inspired. In 1880, Guiteau wrote a speech named Grant Against Hancock in support of Ulysses Grant for a third non-consecutive term, but changed the name to Garfield after James A. Garfield surprisingly won the Republican candidacy. Guiteau believed it was him that led to Garfield winning the presidency and in return expected to be awarded consulship in Vienna or Paris. He was denied both positions multiple times. Finally, Guiteau believed God told him to kill the president, determining it as a removal and not an assassination. On July 2, 1881, Charles Guiteau shot Garfield twice in the back. As he was trying to escape, Guiteau ran into police entering the train station and was arrested. Garfield died on September 19th. It's believed he died because the doctors were using non-sterilized instruments and unwashed hands, which led to the wounds becoming infected. Because Guiteau was a lawyer, he insisted on representing himself, but the court denied it. During the trial, Guiteau became a media sensation as he would frequently curse and insult the judge, witnesses, prosecution, and even his own defense team. He would also recite his poems in length and receive legal advice from random audience members. He's also reported to have waved and smiled at spectators and reporters. He even expected to get released, with plans to run for president in 1884. Eventually, he was found guilty and hanged in July of 1882. Guiteau was alleged to be dancing on his way to the gallows, even shaking hands with the executioner. Julia Butterfly Hill. Julia Lorraine Hill is an American environmental activist. She is most famous for her time spent in a giant redwood tree in Humboldt County, California. The effort was to protest the Pacific Lumber Company, who were removing trees in the area. Originally, they only wanted someone to sit in the tree for 1 week, as they would regularly rotate tree sitters. Hill lived on 2 6x4-foot platforms for 738 days. During her time in the tree, she used solar-powered cell phones for interviews and hosted TV crews. Eventually, in 1999, the Pacific Lumber Company agreed to preserve all trees within a 200-foot buffer zone, and that Hill and the activists would give the $50,000 raised to the logging company, with some being donated to the company for research into sustainable forestry practices. After her tree sit, Hill became the co-founder of Circle of Life Foundation and the Engage Network, training civic leaders on social change. Charles Joffin. Charles John Joffin was a British-American chef famous for being the chief baker aboard the Titanic. When the ship hit the iceberg, Joffin was off-duty, relaxing in his bunk. He ordered his men to prepare lifeboats alongside gathering bread for all aboard. He was assigned captain of Lifeboat 10, although he was not aboard it. Joffin was on the ship as it was tilting, reporting that he rode the rail like an elevator. Eventually, he was found by collapsible boat B, however, there was no room for him aboard. A cook named Isaac Maynard held Joffin's hand until another lifeboat appeared, and Joffin was able to get aboard. Joffin basically had no ill effects other than swollen feet, and he lived until 1956, where he died at the age of 78. COINTELPRO. The counterintelligence program was a covert and illegal project by the FBI in the 1950s and 60s. The goal was to survey, infiltrate, and discredit organizations that the FBI perceived as subversive. The original aim was the Communist Party of the United States, but the scope grew to include everything from the Black Panther Party, American Indian Movement, United Farm Workers, and even the KKK. The program was secret until March 8, 1971, when the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI burglarized an FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania, took several dossiers, and exposed the program by passing this material to new agencies. It was revealed the methods of intelligence gathering were mostly illegal, including harassment, illegal force, secret recording devices, and so on. It was also revealed that the program was responsible for events such as the death of Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party. Although COINTELPRO was shut down in 1971, FBI surveillance continued afterwards with similar tactics such as illegal bugs and opening personal mail. Tuskegee Syphilis Study. The U.S. Public Health Service Untreated Syphilis Study at Tuskegee was a study conducted between 1932 and 1972. Patients were not consensual and specifically did not offer treatment in order to study the effects of syphilis. Subjects of the study were black men ages 25 and older, but some women contracted syphilis from contact with the men. The participants received a settlement for the study, including a $37,000 payout for living group participants, or $15,000 for each heir of a deceased participant. The study has been cited as the start of sweeping change in standard research practices. 1904 Olympic disaster. The 1904 Olympics were the first Olympics that America ever hosted. It was hosted in St. Louis, Missouri, and was tied into the year's World Fair. The Olympics were a letdown in general, overshadowed by the fair and its bizarre offerings, and a lack of official record-keeping and participation due to the cost of travel to America. All of this accumulated into the main event, the 1904 Marathon. The race was run during the hottest part of the day, with minimal water supply and the course not cleared, meaning runners had to dodge ongoing traffic, the public, and even trains. The first to finish was Frederick Lors, even having a picture taken with Alice Roosevelt, daughter of President Teddy Roosevelt. However, it turned out Lors had actually dropped out of the race, having hitchhiked his way back to the stadium. The car he was in broke down, so he ran the last 5 miles and finished in about 3 hours and 13 minutes. One runner stole peaches from a spectator and even ate rotten apples from an orchard off the route. Out of the 32 competitors, only 14 finished. Florence, Oregon whale explosion. In November of 1970, a 45-foot sperm whale washed ashore in Florence, Oregon. The Oregon Highway Division was left to come up with a plan on how to deal with the 8 tons of rotting whale that laid on the beach. The plan was simple: just blow it up. Ordinarily, the carcass is towed out to sea before its explosion and is actually a common way of clearing the bodies. This case was a little different. The explosion occurred on the beach, and whale parts began to rain on everything in the area. The chunks were blown everywhere in nearby buildings and parking lots, and even up to 800 feet away. Worst of all, the majority of the whale did not disintegrate in the explosion, leaving the rest to be cleaned by time. Centralia. Centralia, Pennsylvania is a borough in Columbia County and is home to a ghost town. A mine was built in 1854 named the Mine Run Railroad, which would recover the large amounts of coal deposits underneath the area. In 1962, an abandoned strip mine pit which had been being used as a landfill was set on fire by firefighters to clean it. An unsealed opening in the pit caused the fire to spread into the now abandoned coal mines beneath Centralia. The effects weren't immediate, as it wasn't until 1979 when it started to affect underground fuel tanks and creating sinkholes that would open up with plumes of hot steam. In 1992, PA Governor Bob Casey invoked eminent domain on all land in the area and condemned all the buildings. As of 2010, there are only 5 homes still in the area. Because of the abundance of coal, the fire is still burning to this day, and is even expected to still burn for another 250 years. The Battle of Los Angeles. In February of 1942, radars picked up an unidentified target 120 miles west of Los Angeles. A little past 2 a.m., anti-aircraft barrage started firing at a reported 25 airplanes and a balloon with a red flare. The attack was deemed a false alarm caused by wartime nerves. After the war, Japan stated it had no planes in the area at the time of the raid. The famous picture taken of the night also stirred confusion, as the object seemingly illuminated by the lights doesn't appear to be a plane or a balloon, but in fact a flying saucer. However, it turns out the image was heavily modified prior to publication. Salvation Mountain. Salvation Mountain is a visionary environment created by Leonard Knight. In 1984, Knight discovered Slab City, a retirement commune, and left a small monument of concrete and paint. This original monument grew until 1989 when it collapsed. Knight saw this as God's way of letting him know that the mountain wasn't safe. He started working on the second Salvation Mountain, which included better materials such as straw. In 1998, he expanded the mountain, including Navajo ideas from settlers in the area. This created the Hogan, a dome-like structure made of adobe and straw that insulates from heat, which Knight intended to live in. He made another formation called the Museum, which contains small items given to him by friends and visitors, as well as a hot air balloon Knight had created and failed to fly. Straw Hat Riot. The Straw Hat Riot of 1922 was a riot in New York City that lasted about 8 days. The reason for the riots was that men had continued to wear straw hats after the last acceptable day of summer of the season. Typically by September 15th, men were not supposed to wear straw hats. It was a tradition for youths to knock straw hats off of wearers' heads and stomp on them. The riot began on September 13th when youth started the tradition early. This started a fight between the teens and a group of dock workers, which even stopped traffic on the Manhattan Bridge. The riots lasted for 8 days, where New York youth continued to harass straw hat wearers. Billy Possum. Billy Possum refers to an attempt during William Taft's presidency in 1909 to replace the teddy bear as the household stuffed animal. The teddy bear was created during Theodore Roosevelt's presidency. After leaving office, the toy company behind the bear feared it would stop selling without the ties to the current president. Newly elected President William Taft had already been associated with possums, as he was fond of them as a meal popular in the South known as possum and taters. The origin of the name comes from a political cartoon where it told the teddy bear to beat it and declared Billy Possum the new national toy. After seeing the cartoon, Susie Wright Allgood saw the opportunity and alongside cartoonist Louis C. Gregg formed the Georgia Billy Possum Company, and within a week got the patent and manufacturing started for opossum toys to be ready for Taft's March 4th inauguration. James Revis. James Addison Revis was an American con man best known for perpetrating one of the largest land frauds in U.S. history, the Peralta Grant hoax. In the 1880s, Revis forged a series of Spanish colonial documents claiming that a vast swath of land in Arizona and New Mexico, nearly 12 million acres, had been granted to a noble Spanish family, the Peraltas. He married a woman he falsely claimed was the last surviving heir to the grant, styling himself the Baron of Arizona. Revis used these fake documents to demand payments from settlers, railroads, and mining companies occupying the land. For a time, he lived lavishly on the proceeds and gained recognition from some officials who believed his claims were legitimate. U.S. investigators eventually uncovered the forgeries. In 1895, Revis was tried and convicted of fraud, serving about 2 years in prison. After his release, he lived in poverty and obscurity, dying in Denver in 1914. William H. Mumler. William H. Mumler was an American spirit photographer who worked in New York and Boston. Spirit or ghost photography rose in popularity after the Civil War, as many wanted pictures with deceased relatives. Images needed to be processed with direct exposure to light, and it was possible to tamper with the images and leave faint marks that appeared as though ghosts were in the image. Mumler became a spirit photographer after having one of himself taken that showed the spirit of his deceased cousin. Mumler's most famous photograph was actually of Mary Todd Lincoln, with the ghost of Abraham Lincoln in the bathroom. Strangely, Mumler claims he did not know that his client was Mary Todd Lincoln until after the photo was developed and revealed a figure that looked similar to the former president. Eventually, Mumler was sued for fraud, but was acquitted by the judge, and his business continued until his death in 1884. Guano Islands Act. In the 1840s, guano, or seabird excrement, was a prized agricultural fertilizer as well as a saltpeter for gunpowder. The Guano Islands Act of 1856 allowed U.S. citizens to claim possession of islands with guano deposits in the name of the U.S. The Guano Islands were not meant to be populated by Americans or entered into the Union of the United States. The explicit purpose of holding the islands was to mine guano. The most recent claim was made in 1997, but it was denied because the courts ruled America already had jurisdiction of the island. In total, over 100 islands were claimed under the act. Today, only 10 remain under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Fat Men's Clubs. Fat men's clubs were social clubs popular in the 1910s and 1920s. However, the first one was created in 1869, named the Fat Men's Association of New York City. The clubs were usually for wealthy men that could afford an overabundance of food to become fat. Typical admission would require the men to be at least 200 pounds. Death of Lincoln's Dog. Fido was Abraham Lincoln's family dog. The dog was sadly stabbed in 1866, leading to its death. At the time, the dog was under the care of a neighbor and friend named John E. Roll. The killer was identified as Charles E. Plonk, then 24, a clerk and the son of Springfield grocer Jacob C. Plonk. He was apparently drunk at the time of the attack, but there are other reports that the stabbing was accidental and that Fido, out of excitement, jumped on Charlie and scared him. Schuylkill Notes. Schuylkill Notes are small pieces of paper with symbolism-oriented conspiracy theories printed on them, which have appeared in many locations in the United States in different forms. The first notes were found in 2019, discovered in the packaging of food products from a store in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania. The notes are usually about 2 to 3 inches in size, folded and hidden in products, including clothes, as well as pinned to trees. The messages usually have something to do with secret societies and conspiracy theories, and mentioning popular media companies. Great Michigan Pizza Funeral. In 1973, the FDA recalled items that had used a specific canned mushroom that had been discovered to use a botulism-causing bacteria. It turns out the manufacturer had used the mushrooms in almost 30,000 frozen pizzas. Because of this, they also needed to be recalled. As a means of creating publicity and a demonstration of his accountability, the manufacturer organized a public disposal of the recalled pizza on March 5, 1973. He themed the event as a funeral, calling it the Great Michigan Pizza Funeral. During it, the pizzas were tipped into an 18-foot deep hole, then covered. On top of the burial, Fabrini laid a wreath that resembled a cheese and mushroom pizza. Albert Stevens. Albert Stevens, also known as Patient Cal 1, was a house painter from Ohio. Stevens would become the first patient to get a plutonium-238 injection in California, unknowingly receiving a dose that was considered to be many times the lethal textbook dose. This was part of the Manhattan Project's research on the effect of radiation on humans. Stevens was a volunteer, although it doesn't seem he was ever told he would be infected with radiation. After some time, it was believed that Stevens had developed cancer, an expected outcome of the research. During his surgery, they took samples of urine and stool, which came back that Stevens actually had never developed cancer. He had a benign gastric ulcer, unrelated to the plutonium injection. However, the researchers continued to lie to him, telling him that he had cancer and they needed to continue to collect samples from him. Albert Stevens died in December of 1966 of respiratory failure. He is known as the survivor of the most amount of radiation exposure ever. Mad Gasser of Mattoon. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon is a name given to an alleged mass hysteria event in the mid-1940s where victims would report strange smells followed by nausea and vomiting. The first attack was reported in 1944, when a married couple reported a smell followed by partial paralyzation and sickness. A mother and daughter living close by reported a similar situation. The next day, another woman reported a similar attack, but she was able to report it to the police. Her husband returned and found a man hiding close to their house's window. The man escaped, but was described as a tall man in dark clothes and a tight-fitting cap. During one of the attacks, a handkerchief was left on a porch, which was theorized to be used to knock out the family dog that usually stayed guard on the porch. Over the next 2 weeks, 21 total reports came in of similar attacks. The police announced that reports would be given a lower priority due to many false reports. After this, reports did decrease, and the gasser was never found. Operation Paul Bunyan. In August of 1976, when United Nations representatives from the US were trimming the branches of a tree in the joint security area of the Korean DMZ, a group of about 15 officials were attacked and 2 were killed by North Korean soldiers. 3 days after the murders, the US and South Korean forces launched Operation Paul Bunyan. The question was whether they follow a diplomatic route, informing the North Koreans of their plan and potentially inviting international observers, or would they cut the tree without warning, using the maximum number of men to do so and therefore maximize their show of force. The operation had 2 main parts, one which involved cutting down the tree, the other, the preparation to blow up Freedom Bridge and bomber flyovers as a show of force. The North Koreans responded with a busload of troops, all that just watched as the tree was cut down. Although there was no ensuing battle, the show of force worked as the nearby North Korean guard posts were also dismantled. World War II bat bombs. Lytle S. Adams was a dental surgeon from Irwin, Pennsylvania. He wrote a letter to the White House explaining an idea for a bat bomb, a bomb that would release bats alongside incendiaries that would burn the wooden buildings of Tokyo. Adams was an acquaintance of Eleanor Roosevelt, and President FDR took the suggestion seriously. The Army and Air Force started working on the project in 1942. The design of the bombs was simple: a hibernating free-tailed bat with a small, timed incendiary bomb that would drop from a bomber at dawn. The bats would then make their way into buildings and attics, and the incendiaries would then start fires in inaccessible places. During a series of tests, some bats were accidentally released and they roosted under a fuel tank, which set the entire testing range on fire. Because of this, the Navy took over the operation, renaming it Project X-Ray. The project was cancelled when it was determined that it would not be combat ready until the middle of 1945, far too late to be needed. CIA Acoustic Cat. Operation Acoustic Kitty was a secret plan to turn cats into portable spying devices. However, the CIA only ever produced one acoustic kitty because it abandoned the project after a test with a cat that went horribly wrong. The operation included a surgeon implanting a microphone into the cat's ear, a radio transmitter in its skull, and a thin wire into its fur. The cat was released at the nearby Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. Sadly, the cat was hit by a taxi and killed immediately. Pacific Northwest Tree Octopus. The Pacific Northwest tree octopus can be found in the temperate rainforests of the Olympic Peninsula on the west coast of North America. Or, that is what you might believe if you've ever read the Save the Pacific Northwest Tree Octopus website. In reality, the octopus doesn't exist, and is part of an internet hoax created in 1998. The website was used to conduct a study on internet literacy in 2007. The sample included approximately 50 school students around the age of 13. The students were presented the website alongside a fake letter from another class from a different area, asking them to make sure the website is reliable. The tree that owns itself. A white oak resides at the corner of Deering and Finley Streets at the end of downtown Athens, Georgia. This tree has a legal ownership over itself and all land within 8 feet of its trunk. The tree that stands there now is actually the second in its line. The original, estimated around 400 years old, was given the land in the 1820s after Colonel William H. Jackson, a Civil War photographer, died and in his will placed the tree and the 8-foot land around it to be owned by the tree itself. That tree was knocked over in a storm in 1942, but only a few years later a new tree was planted. While there actually is no legal precedent for the tree owning its own land, it just so happens that no one has ever contested the tree's property rights. Schlitzie. Schlitzie Surtees was born on September 10, 1901 in New York. He was born with microcephaly that left him disabled, maintaining a small stature and an abnormally small brain and skull. Schlitzie was an American sideshow performer working most famously for the Barnum and Bailey's Greatest Show on Earth. Here he was featured as the last of the Aztecs, or the Monkey Girl. He worked for a few other circuses before eventually making his film debut in The Sideshow, which featured actual sideshow performers for background characters. He also appeared in Freaks, a horror film based on sideshow performers. He's also credited in 1934's Tomorrow's Children, where he plays a mentally defective criminal. After this, while performing in the Tom Mix Circus, George Surtees, a chimpanzee trainer, adopted him. After Surtees' death in 1965, his daughter and legal sister of Schlitzie committed him to the Los Angeles County Hospital. Here he became the ward of a sword swallower named Billy Unks and returned to Sideshow until they left in 1968. Afterwards, he appeared at random shows and street-level events until his death in 1971. Max Headroom broadcast hijacking. The Max Headroom broadcast hijack happened on the night of November 22, 1987, when a TV station in Chicago, Illinois had its signal interrupted. The subject of the video was a person wearing a Max Headroom mask. The first takeover occurred at 9 p.m. during a sports segment on WGN-TV. It happened for about 30 seconds, and then the only noise was a loud buzz. 2 hours later, during an episode of Doctor Who, the signal was again interrupted. This time, the affected tower had no one on duty, and the hijacker was allowed to take over for nearly 90 seconds until it was ended by the senders. He rambles on for a little longer, making references to an animated TV show and other TV programs. The clip ends with the figure dressed as Max Headroom pulling his pants down, revealing his bare butt, and a woman with a fly swatter hitting it and saying, "They are coming to get me." No one ever claimed responsibility, and the investigations never led to any arrests. War of Whiskers. Tom and Jerry War of Whiskers is a 3D fighting game for the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox. Nah, I'm just kidding. The War of Whiskers is about a Massachusetts farmer named Joseph Palmer who was criticized and scandalized for having a beard. After he moved from his farm to the town of Fitchburg, Massachusetts, locals hurled rocks at him, calling him an old Jew, and when he refused to submit to a forcible shaving, threw him in jail. He died in 1875, and his tombstone reads, "Persecuted for wearing the beard." This isn't the only time someone was criminalized for having a beard. The movement itself became known as the War of Whiskers. John Quincy Adams' Earth Expedition. In 1820, explorer Jeremiah N. Reynolds made numerous petitions to Congress for funding an expedition to the South Pole and the South Pacific as a whole. Eventually, his pleas met the eyes of the president at the time, John Quincy Adams. The basis of the exploration and research was around the hollow Earth theory, that the planet is hollow and that the poles provided holes into the center of the planet. Although Adams didn't specifically believe in this theory, he did believe in Reynolds and his vision. Because of congressional support for the trip, the Adams administration did eventually approve funding for Reynolds. However, the 1828 election saw Andrew Jackson win, who removed all support and funding. The privately funded tour did set sail in 1829, but was met with mutiny and Reynolds was abandoned. Although Adams was never part of the journey, he did support the exploration, specifically the potential research in the lesser explored regions of the world. Oofty Goofty. Leonard Leon Borchardt, better known as Oofty Goofty, was a German sideshow performer who lived in San Francisco, California in the late 19th century and Houston, Texas in the early 20th century. Goofty was a Jewish immigrant, a stowaway on the SS Frisia in 1876, and was even in the US Army until he deserted in 1883. The origin of his nickname comes from his appearance in a sideshow where he was covered in road tar and horsehair, locked in a cage, and used as the Wild Man of Borneo attraction. He would act as a wild man and yell "Oofty Goofty" to the audience. Goofty also famously appeared as Romeo in a stage play alongside famous actress Big Bertha as Juliet. One of the weirdest claims about Oofty Goofty's life is that he seems to have started a business where he would let people pay him either to kick him, smack him with a walking stick, or beat him with a baseball bat. He boasted that he was immune to pain. It's not confirmed when Borchardt died, but the last time he appeared at a census was 1923, where he would have been 61 years old. William Stewart Houston. William Patrick Hitler was the nephew of Adolf Hitler and served in the US Navy during World War II. He was born to Aloysius Hitler Jr., the brother of Adolf Hitler, and Irish-born Bridget Dowling. William visited the United States in 1939, where he went on a nationwide tour titled My Uncle Adolf, where he told stories of Hitler and the German Nazis to American citizens. When the war started, William tried to join the British forces but was denied. In 1942, he sent a letter to President Roosevelt asking to be allowed to join the US forces. After an FBI investigation, William was allowed to join the Navy. He served in the Pacific Theater and was awarded the Purple Heart for a shrapnel wound. After the war, he became a legal US citizen and changed his name to William Patrick Stewart Houston. He got married to a German immigrant and had 4 children. He founded Brookhaven Laboratories, which still to this day is headquartered out of New York, working on medical and energy efficiency research. Raising of Chicago. The city of Chicago regularly saw rain and storms that would flood its streets and leave it impossible to travel throughout the town. During the 1850s and 1860s, engineers raised the level of Chicago by approximately 4 feet. The raising of the town was not simply to raise it higher than Lake Michigan, but to add a citywide sewage system that would allow for water not to get stuck in the streets of the city. Many of the city's wooden-framed buildings were seen as not worth raising, as new stone buildings were studied. Instead of raising these buildings, they were actually moved by being put on rollers and moved to the outskirts of the town. Toledo War. The Toledo War isn't a war by typical terms. Instead, it's a dispute between 2 states, specifically Michigan and Ohio, over a small piece of land called the Toledo Strip. In 1835, when the dispute began, Ohio was an official state and Michigan was just a territory. Ohio was surveying the borders between the two, and laws were unclear about the boundaries, and both claimed the Toledo Strip. In the spring, 9 Ohio surveyors were imprisoned, charged with violating Michigan's Pains and Penalties Act. Surveyors that escaped reported back to the governor that there was an armed force on the border between the territory and Ohio. Ohio held a lot of power in Congress at the time, and President Andrew Jackson was swayed to act in favor of the state. Because of this, he removed the current territorial governor of Michigan, Stevens T. Mason, and replaced him with John S. Horner. In 1836, Arkansas was signed as the 25th state of the Union, and to balance the amount of slave and freed states, Michigan was also permitted to become a state, but only if it gave the Toledo Strip to Ohio. The trade-off was they were granted the remaining portion of the Upper Peninsula. This war is actually the reason that Michigan has the separated peninsula instead of it being part of Wisconsin. Wilmer McLean. Wilmer McLean was a grocer from Alexandria, Virginia. In 1853, he married a wealthy woman and moved to Manassas, Virginia. The Civil War began in 1861, and one of the first battles of the war happened right outside his house. What came to be known as the First Battle of Bull Run, McLean's house served as General Beauregard's and the Confederates' headquarters. Because of the Second Battle of Bull Run, which occurred a year after the first, McLean decided to move his family. He moved to Appomattox, Virginia, thinking he and his family would be safe from the war. Instead, McLean's house in Appomattox would be used in 1865 as the meeting place where General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant. McLean holds a special place in the history of the Civil War as one of the few people involved in both the first and last encounters of the war. Great Moon Hoax. The Great Moon Hoax of 1835 was a hoax perpetrated by the New York newspaper The Sun that reported that life was found on the moon. Falsely attributed to Sir John Herschel and his fictitious companion Andrew Grant, the articles described animals on the moon, including bison, single-horned goats, mini zebras, unicorns, bipedal tailless beavers, and bat-like winged humanoids, who built temples. The articles purported that there were trees, oceans, and beaches on the moon. The Sun never issued a retraction even after it was widely known to be a hoax. Confederados. Confederados is the Brazilian name for Confederate outcasts that fled the United States following the Civil War. The term also applies to Confederate descendants who still live in the area. It is estimated that up to 20,000 American Confederates immigrated to the Empire of Brazil from the southern United States. It's estimated that their numbers are around 260,000 today. The Confederados have an annual festival named Festa Confederata. The festival features a mix of Confederate flags and attire, and American Southern food, usually mixed with traditional Brazilian foods and music. Madden Curse. The Madden Curse is a superstition that whatever player appears on the cover of the annual NFL Madden video game will be cursed, having a decline in performance or a significant injury the next season. The curse began in the 1999 to 2000 season as Garrison Hearst suffered a fibula fracture following his appearance on the cover. It doesn't appear to affect every cover member, but the pattern exists enough that many people are afraid to accept offers to be on the cover. Aroma of Tacoma. The aroma of Tacoma is a saying about a town in the state of Washington that, since the early 1900s, has had a distinct and poor scent in the area. The Tacoma aroma is a combination of the sediment around the Commencement Bay and the past 100 years of industrial development. In the area, there is an oil refinery, a rendering plant that turns animal waste into recycled materials, a pulpwood and tree mill, and a now closed paper mill. Conch Republic. The Conch Republic was born on April 23, 1982, in response to a United States Border Patrol blockade of the Florida Keys. The Conch Republic is now a micronation with the capital city of Key West, Florida, and the territories of the island chain known as the Florida Keys. The Republic actually faced an invasion in 1995, where the US Army Reserves were performing a training exercise and using the Florida Keys. The Conch Republic was never officially notified, and therefore prepared for war, in the only way that they could, by attacking the reserve troops with water balloons and stale bread. Jimmy Carter Peanut Statue. The Jimmy Carter Peanut Statue is a monument built in 1976 to support Jimmy Carter during his presidential campaign. The statue features Jimmy Carter's smile and no other distinguishing features. The peanut was chosen because Carter was a peanut farmer before running for president. Butt Fumble. The butt fumble is an event in football history where quarterback Mark Sanchez of the New York Jets runs into his own linesman's back, causing him to fumble the ball. The Patriots defense then retrieves the fumble and scores. This play in itself wouldn't be too bad if it wasn't part of 3 Jets fumbles that the Patriots scored from in a span of 52 seconds of game time. Donkey Basketball. Donkey basketball is a variation of the standard basketball game played on a standard basketball court, but in which the players ride donkeys. There isn't a professional scene, as donkey basketball is usually a one-time fundraiser type event. However, the sport has been the center of many animal rights activists thinking the sport is cruel to donkeys, specifically that the donkeys are starved for days before the events to ensure they don't defecate on the courts. NASA Dolphin Experiment. Peter the Dolphin was the subject of a NASA-funded research project in the 1960s where the organization was trying to teach him to understand and mimic human speech. Margaret Howe Lavatt and John C. Lilly created a dolphinarium, a dolphin house in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, as a part of a project with the goal of speaking with extraterrestrial life. Lovett was assigned to teach 3 dolphins, Sissy, Pamela, and Peter, the human language. Peter was specifically assigned to Lovett, where she lived with the dolphin and spent all of their time together. During the time the dolphinarium was open, John Lilly was also provided with funding to test LSD, which they did on other dolphin subjects, but they never yielded any important research. The lack of results from both primary funding sources for the dolphinarium caused it to eventually lose funding. Sadly, Peter the dolphin died by drowning. This way of death for dolphins is apparently the equivalent of killing themselves, as they actually choose not to breathe air that is available to them. Mayday Mystery. The Mayday Mystery is a series of cryptic advertisements taken out annually on May 1st, May Day, in the Arizona Daily Wildcat since 1981. The ads are described as a mess of equations, historical figures, artwork, and symbols, and are signed with a smiley face figure. The first one, appearing May 1st of 1981, featured a quote saying "Long live Chairman Mao," written in simplified Chinese. Since the initial release, the ads have become more and more complex and usually involve themes of social unrest. In a 2003 interview, University of Arizona alumni Robert Hungerford admitted to having been placing the ads for the period he attended at the school. He claimed to be submitting them as a part of an organization, but refused to name the group responsible. Curse of Billy Penn. The Curse of Billy Penn is an urban legend spawning out of Philadelphia to try and explain the failure of the city's professional sports teams to win championships. The name of the curse comes from the building of the One Liberty Place skyscraper in 1987, which ended up taller than the height of the William Penn statue that is on top of the Philadelphia City Hall. There was an agreement that the statue would be the highest point in the city. Weirdly, the curse was seemingly lifted as another building, the Comcast Center, was finished in 2007 as the new tallest building in Philadelphia. Construction workers attached a small model figurine of William Penn, making it the highest point in the city. Only a year later, the Philadelphia Phillies won the 2008 World Series, which was the first championship title since 1983. To continue warding the curse, when a new building, the Comcast Technology Center, was built in 2017 as the new tallest building in the city, again a William Penn figurine was placed at the top. Not even a year later, the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl, the first Super Bowl for the team and the football championship since 1960. Liver-eating Johnson. John Jeremiah Garrison Johnston, later just Johnson, was a common subject of folklore in the Montana and Flathead Native regions during the late 1800s. The main legend goes that Johnson's wife was murdered by a Crow Man, a Native American tribe in the region, and ignited Johnson's furious rampage against the tribe. He went on to kill, scalp, and eat the livers of more than 300 Crow Native Americans. The odd addition of cutting out and eating the livers of the men he killed garnered him the nickname Liver-Eating Johnson. Johnson's legend isn't only because of his time fighting the Crows, as he also served in the Union Army out of St. Louis and as deputy sheriff in Colson, Montana. Francis E. Deck. Francis E. Deck was an American lawyer who gained fame from the 1960s to 1990s when he started publishing diatribes that were filled with conspiracy theories and were highly accusatory and contained vulgar attacks. He first became famous due to the newscaster Boyd Britton's widely circulated dramatic readings of his rants, and figures interested in Deck's work included William S. Burroughs and Genesis P. Orridge. The latter used a recording of Deck's rants on the psychic TV album Ultra House. One of the most famous quotes from his ramblings includes a repeated phrase, "worldwide communist gangster computer god," and a conspiracy to control the world through mind control devices he called Frankenstein radio controls. Balloon Fest 86. Balloon Fest 86 was a fundraising event in Cleveland, Ohio, held on September 27, 1986, in which the local chapter of United Way set a world record by releasing almost 1.5 million balloons. The event was intended to be a harmless publicity stunt. However, the event is often called the Balloon Fest disaster, as the release of so many balloons caused immense problems. First, strong winds blew many of the balloons north of the city, and rain caused the balloons to fall immediately. The balloons also caused the runway at the Burke-LaFront Airport to shut down and prevented the Coast Guard from finding 2 fishermen who had fallen off their boat. Falling balloons also littered much of the city and clogged the area's waterways. Traffic accidents occurred throughout the city as drivers attempted to dodge falling balloons. Eventually, balloons reached as far south as Medina County, spooking a prized Arabian horse whose owner was sued and settled with United Way. Within a few weeks, balloons were littering beaches as far as Ontario. 1961 Goldsboro accident. While flying near Goldsboro, North Carolina in January of 1961, a B-52G Stratofortress bomber crashed while attempting to land at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. A catastrophic failure occurred that caused the plane to break up mid-air, leading to 2 Mk-39 nuclear weapons falling from the plane at heights between 10,000 and 2,000 feet. 7 of 8 arming, fusing, and firing switches and devices in one bomb automatically actuated, with only a crew-controlled switch preventing a nuclear detonation. Louisiana hippo ranching. In the early 1900s, the United States was facing a serious meat shortage that caused meat to become expensive and in short supply. To solve this issue, Robert F. Broussard, a representative from Louisiana, came before the House Committee on Agriculture to introduce his so-called American Hippo Bill. This proposed importing hippos from Africa in order to greatly increase the meat supply. Hippos, as well as other African animals, would become staples of every American farm and introduce hundreds of millions of tons of meat into the American market. Broussard had the support of several experts and even former President Theodore Roosevelt behind his bill. Although the bill received national attention, the committee ultimately rejected it. New England vampire panic. In the late 1800s, a tuberculosis outbreak was ravaging the New England states. As a response to the outbreak, people began to think that dead people recently buried had become vampiric monsters that fed on the living. People began exhuming corpses and ritually destroying or burning their bodies, believing that this would stop the spread of the disease. One such case was that of Mercy Brown, who was exhumed and desecrated. 2 months after Mercy's death, her father George Brown, who did not believe that a vampire was to blame, reluctantly permitted others to exhume the bodies of his family. They found that Mercy's body showed little decomposition, had quote-unquote fresh blood in her heart, and had turned in the grave. This was enough to convince the villagers that Mercy Brown was the cause of the consumption. The heart of the exhumed body was burnt, mixed with water, and given to her surviving brother to drink in order to stop the influence of the undead. The cure was unsuccessful. Crocker Land Expedition. In 1907, famous North Pole explorer Robert Peary claimed to have seen an island near the North Pole that he named Crocker Island after one of his benefactors. Another explorer, however, claimed that they had been to the North Pole before Peary and that the so-called Crocker Land didn't exist. One of Peary's assistants declared that he would lead an expedition to prove Peary right about the island. The assistant, named Macmillan, received funding from several institutions and set out in 1913 to set foot on Crocker Land. Unfortunately, after months of searching, Crocker Land was never found, and it was determined that it did not exist after all. Theories swirled about why Peary would have mentioned the island to begin with. What most likely happened in 1906 was that Peary saw a kind of polar mirage, leading him to believe that there was an island where there was not. Horace Burgess's treehouse. In the 1990s, a landscaper named Horace Burgess claimed to have received a vision from God telling him to build a treehouse. After over a decade, Burgess had built the largest treehouse in the entire world that spanned across 7 large trees, stood 100 feet tall, and covered up to 10,000 square feet. The Tennessee State Fire Marshal eventually forced Burgess to close the treehouse, stating that it had become a tourist attraction, which was essentially true. Visitors came from all over to explore and vandalize the treehouse, but it did not live up to the state building codes. Unfortunately, in October of 2019, the treehouse went up in flames and burned down in just 15 minutes. The cause of the fire is still unknown. Dolly Gray Imposter. The Dolly Gray Imposter was the nickname given to an American con artist who posed as a famous football player named Dolly Gray in the early 1920s. The real Dolly Gray had been a star at Stanford University and briefly played professional football, but the imposter, whose real name was believed to be Jack Dolly Gray, or sometimes William Henry Dolly Gray, took advantage of his fame to deceive professional teams. The imposter successfully convinced the Canton Bulldogs, one of the leading teams of the era, that he was the genuine Gray, joining the team in 1923 and even playing in at least one game before being exposed as a fraud. His deception was discovered when teammates and sports writers noticed his lack of skill and contacted Stanford to confirm his identity. Once it became clear he was an imposter, he disappeared from professional football as abruptly as he had arrived. Bigfoot Trap. The Bigfoot Trap was a trap constructed by the North American Wildlife Research Team in 1974 in Jacksonville, Oregon. The trap is a 10 by 10 foot square, built using thick slabs of wood held together with metal bands and secured to the earth with a telephone pole. For 6 long years, the research team refilled the trap with carcasses of dead animals, hoping to discover the monster and forever go down in history. However, the trap was only ever set off by bears and confused hunters. Needless to say, it has never caught any Sasquatch. Oregon World War II deaths. There is only one site in the continental United States where Americans were killed by enemy action during World War II. That site is Bly, Oregon, now marked by the Mitchell Monument. In 1944 and 1945, Japan launched nearly 10,000 balloon bombs, an experimental weapon carrying anti-personnel and incendiary bombs designed as a response to America's Doolittle attacks in mainland Japan. Over 300 balloons have been found across the US, Canada, and Mexico. They were designed to kill people and cause fires, intending to create panic in the seemingly safe United States. They were also rigged to self-destruct, leaving no trace of who or what started the chaos. The first bomb was spotted in California, but was hidden by the Office of Censorship for National Security. An unfortunate Sunday school class stumbled across one on May 5th of 1945. When Archie Mitchell's 5 students and pregnant wife Elsie claimed they had found a balloon. He told them not to touch it, but all he heard was a large boom, and they were all killed. These are still the only known deaths due to the balloons, and the only known World War II deaths in the continental United States during World War II. Haley Boggs. Thomas Haley Boggs Sr. was an American politician, part of the Democratic Party, and was part of the House of Representatives from New Orleans, Louisiana. Boggs wasn't a random congressional representative, however. He signed the Southern Manifesto, which condemned desegregation and voted against multiple civil rights acts. Most famously, however, he was the youngest member of the Warren Commission, the famous council created to investigate the assassination of President Kennedy. He is reported to have had strong doubts about the commission's single bullet thesis, but agreed that Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy. Lady of the Dunes. Ruth Marie Terry was murdered in July of 1974, with her body originally being unidentified and nicknamed Lady of the Dunes. After a troublesome early adult life, including a marriage ending early because of her husband's death, Terry married Guy Rockwell Moldovan in February of 1974. After traveling to visit Terry's family in Tennessee, Moldovan returned to tell Terry's family that she had gone missing from the couple's California home. In July of 1974, a 12-year-old girl discovered a decomposing body in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Both hands and one forearm were missing, the body was nearly decapitated, and one side of the head had been beaten with some kind of object. There was also no sign of struggle nearby, leading police to theorize she knew the killer. Because of missing limbs and teeth, both the woman and the killer could not be identified. In 2022, the skeletal remains were sent to Othram, where they were eventually able to identify the body as Ruth Marie Terry. This led the search and primary main suspect to now deceased Guy Moldovan. Unsurprisingly, he also had a complicated history, being charged with larceny after swindling his third wife's family at the same time his second wife had gone missing. Human remains were also found in Moldovan's septic tank, but they could not be identified and he was never charged in any connection to his missing wife. He was also the lead suspect in 2 other murders, a 28-year-old bread truck driver and a 17-year-old waitress in June of 1950. In 2023, he was officially named as the killer of the Lady of the Dunes. Bowel Movement Bandit. Throughout the 2010s in Akron, Ohio, residents reported a man in the area that had allegedly pooped on at least 19 parked cars in driveways, as well as on slides on people's lawns. The locals named this mysterious criminal the Bowel Movement Bandit. The bandit was photographed in March of 2015, but no official conclusions or arrests were ever made. New Haven Green Bodies. The New Haven Green is a privately owned park in the center of New Haven, Connecticut, with origins dating back to 1638. The Green's 16-acre area was originally designed to hold enough people who believed they would be spared in the second coming of Christ. In October 2012, through the vicious winds of Hurricane Sandy, an oak tree was knocked out of the ground, revealing within its roots a human skeleton. It was known that the church located on the Green had an underground crypt expected to hold approximately 150 bodies. However, after the incident in 2012, it's now estimated that between 4,000 and 10,000 bodies may be buried under the Green, and it was determined that the Green was used as the main burial grounds for the residents of New Haven during its first 150 years. But by 1821, the practice was abolished, and many of the headstones were moved to the Grove Street Cemetery. However, the remains of the dead were not moved, and thus still remain below the soil of the Green. Oakville Blobs. In August of 1994, translucent blobs rained down on an Oakville resident. She believed it was the reason that her mother became ill and her kitten died. The tested blobs were said to contain human blood cells, but the Department of Ecology refuted the results. The blobs were theorized to be waste from a commercial plane or deceased jellyfish that evaporated into the clouds. Weirdly, in 2025, blobs were again reported, this time in the neighboring town of Rochester. These blobs were identified as polyacrylamide, a water-absorbent gel used in water treatment. Toynbee tiles. Toynbee idea in movie 2001 Resurrection Dead on planet Jupiter. This is the inscription on dozens of mosaic tiles found in American cities since as early as 1983. In the United States, tiles have officially been sighted as far west as Kansas City, Missouri, as far north as Boston, Massachusetts, and as far south as Richmond, Virginia. With these tiles usually comes a smaller tile nearby with conspiracies involving the media and the US government. There are a few interpretations of the message. The term Toynbee idea is assumed to refer to a British historian, Arnold J. Toynbee. According to the letters written by the tiler, this stems from a passage in Arnold Toynbee's book Experiences. The other theory is that Toynbee refers to the Toynbee Convector, a short story about a time traveler. The movie 2001 is referring to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is about a mission to Jupiter, with writer Arthur Clarke having a previous work named Jupiter 5, with a ship in it named the Arnold Toynbee. What the actual meaning is still remains a mystery. The 2011 documentary Resurrect the Dead: The Mystery of the Toynbee Tiles claims to have met and spoken with the tiler, but has chosen to keep his identity a mystery. Capitol Hill Mystery Soda Machine. The Capitol Hill Mystery Soda Machine was a vending machine in Capitol Hill, Seattle, notable for its mystery buttons which dispensed unusual drink flavors. It is unknown who restocked the machine, which originally caused the development of a local legend that the machine was haunted. The machine reportedly operated from the late 1990s until its unexplained disappearance in 2018. The machine was a 1970s Coca-Cola unit with buttons that said Mystery, where normal brand sodas would appear. The drinks were usually variety flavors, some not even being manufactured anymore. In 2002, the reported cost of the drinks were only 55 cents, cheaper than the average of $1 from the time. It was raised twice, once in 2014 after an unidentified individual was posted restocking the machine, and in 2018 after Seattle passed a sugary drink tax. Finally, in June of 2018, the machine was removed due to work being done on a nearby bus stop. The Facebook page for the machine posted edited images of it in locations such as the Space Needle, but it has not returned to its location on Capitol Hill. John Teeter. John Teeter, using the handle timetravel_0, posted on a message board in November of 2000 that he claimed to be a time traveler from the year 2036. He wrote about the dystopian future from which he came, a time of war, famine, and destruction. In these initial posts, he discussed how time travel works, even divulging the required components for a working time machine. In 2003, Teeter's posts were all compiled and rearranged to show the narrative that Teeter was claiming about the future. He claimed to be a soldier from 2036, with an assignment to go to 1975 and retrieve an IBM 5100 computer. The reason John was chosen for this mission was a personal one. His grandfather was the lead engineer of the small team responsible for building the IBM 5100. Teeter provided proof by describing unpublicized features of the 5100, which led many to believe that an actual computer scientist was behind the posts. He claimed that he was in the year 2000 to retrieve lost pictures and visit his family. When he posted to forums, however, he often predicted the future, such as a civil war in the United States that would start in 2005, with civil unrest from the previous year's presidential election. Because of this, the US would be split into 5 military regions. However, this was nothing compared to his prediction of World War III to occur in 2015, and a specific N-Day catastrophe that would see multiple US cities nuked by the Russians. In the end, however, Teeter claimed that the many-world interpretation was correct, and that because of it, things he was predicting could be different, and therefore, all of his predictions were non-falsifiable. Teeter has not posted since 2001. Elmer McCurdy. The bandit who wouldn't give up, also known as Elmer McCurdy, was an American outlaw from the late 1800s and early 1900s. McCurdy died in 1911 after a failed robbery of a Katy train that left a $2,000 bounty for his capture. He was shot and killed with one shot to the chest. The more interesting part of Elmer McCurdy's story is actually after his death, as his body was mummified and his body was dressed up with a rifle in hand and put on display for 5 cents per view. In 1916, his body was eventually claimed by 2 carnival promoters pretending to be McCurdy's brothers. His corpse joined the Great Patterson Carnival Show until 1922, after his body was used as a security deposit on a loan. The body then transferred to another traveling show known as the Museum of Crime, touring until the 1940s. When the body was rediscovered in 1968, it was sold to the Hollywood Wax Museum, where he was titled the 1,000-Year-Old Man. The museum closed not long after, and his body was accidentally sold to New Point Amusement Park, where he was used as decor for a creepy funhouse ride. It was discovered that it wasn't a wax figure when, in 1976, while filming an episode of The $6 Million Man, the body was moved and an arm broke off, exposing what looked to be human bones. After this was discovered, he was eventually buried in Oklahoma besides 3 other famous outlaws. (1958) Mars Bluff Nuclear Incident. On March 11, 1958, a B-47 bomber was flying over a small rural town in South Carolina called Mars Bluff when it accidentally dropped a nuclear warhead from the bomb bay. Whether the payload wasn't loaded or the warhead just didn't detonate is unknown. What did blow, however, was the TNT trigger for the bomb, which punched a 24-foot deep and 50-foot wide crater into local man Walter Gregg's garden and even severely damaged his farmhouse, which stood 100 yards away from the blast. The story told in Mars Bluff is that the bomb was launched inadvertently, bumped loose from a B-47 when the plane hit an air pocket as a crew member leaned over the launch trigger to check it. The military never officially said. Its spokespeople insisted early and often that the bomb wasn't armed and that there was no danger of nuclear detonation. Had the bomb been armed and detonated, it would have been 100 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, completely destroying everything around it for miles. 1958 Tybee Island Crash. Much like the previous entry, February 5, 1958 saw the accidental dropping of another nuclear warhead during a training exercise. A fighter jet accidentally collided mid-air with a B-47, damaging the fuel tanks. The pilot, Colonel Howard Richardson, feared the bomb would detonate upon landing, so he jettisoned the bomb into the waters around Wassaw Sound and safely landed at Hunter Air Force Base outside of Savannah. Initially, experts disputed whether the bomb was nuclear or not. If it contains a plutonium core, it is a fully functional nuclear weapon. If the core was replaced with a dummy, it would be non-nuclear but still capable of creating a conventional explosion. After the incident, the Air Force assured the public that the nuclear capsule was removed prior to the flight and fitted with a simulated 150-pound cap made of lead. This was widely accepted until documents from a 1966 congressional testimony were released in 1994 and revealed the weapon was indeed a complete, fully functional bomb with a plutonium pit. If this is true and the bomb does have a plutonium trigger, an above-water explosion would have a fireball with a radius of more than 1 mile and thermal radiation for up to 10 times that distance. John P. O'Neill. John P. O'Neill was an FBI agent and leading expert in counterterrorism in the years before September 11th. Specifically, he was focused on raising concern about organizations such as Al-Qaeda. In 1995, after working for the FBI for almost 20 years, he became the chief of the counterterrorism section. Within his first days, his team captured Ramzi Youssef, the orchestrator of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Through his self-education, O'Neill would become the FBI's top terrorism expert and its authority on Osama bin Laden. His warnings about the terrorist threat to the United States homeland often fell on deaf ears. O'Neill retired from the FBI in August of 2001 and started a new job as the chief of security of the World Trade Center. Just 2 weeks into his new job, O'Neill was in his office on the 34th floor of the South Tower when a plane struck the North Tower. The last sighting of O'Neill was from another FBI agent who saw him heading towards the South Tower before its collapse. His remains were recovered on September 21st. O'Neill's FBI windbreaker, which was recovered from his vehicle after the attacks, is now on display at the 9/11 Museum. Agent 355. Agent 355 is a folk tale from the Revolutionary War era. Agent 355 was supposedly a female spy who was a member of the Manhattan and Long Island intelligence network. No proof of 355's adventures in espionage actually exist. The sole mention of her in the historical record simply implies that she was a woman, not necessarily a spy. The biggest problem with the Agent 355 myth is the name itself, as spies at the time did not refer to themselves as agents, and they did not have numbers to refer to specific people with a numeric value. Georgia Guidestones. The Georgia Guidestones was a monument made from 6 granite slabs that stood from 1980 until 2022 in Elbert County, Georgia. On the slabs was a guide for humanity describing how to recreate society after events such as a nuclear or economic catastrophe. A man using the alias of Robert C. Christian commissioned the Elberton Granite Finishing Company to commission the piece. Christian explained that the stones would function as a compass, calendar, and clock and should be capable of withstanding catastrophic events. He also said he wanted the monument to rival Stonehenge, eventually leading to the site's nickname, the American Stonehenge. On July 6, 2022, an explosive device was used to destroy a portion of the monument, and the rest of the site was taken down for safety concerns. No one has officially been charged with any crime related to the explosion. There was also a slab describing a time capsule that was placed 6 feet under the statue. However, the slab does not have any dates engraved for when the capsule was placed or when it should be opened. After the removal of the slabs, no capsule was found under the monument. Skinwalker Ranch. Skinwalker Ranch is a property near Ballard, Utah that is said to be the site of extremely unusual paranormal activity, with close to 100 incidents reported involving vanishing and mutilated cattle, sightings of unidentified flying objects or orbs, large animals with piercing red eyes that were unscathed when struck by bullets, and invisible objects emitting destructive magnetic fields. After reading the book titled Hunt for the Skinwalker, written by 2 researchers about the ranch, the founder of the National Institute for Discovery Science, Robert Bigelow, was convinced of the supernatural activity there and purchased the ranch. Bigelow hired UFOologists to study the ranch and received $22 million from the Department of Defense to do so. Despite researching at the ranch for several years, the Institute was unable to provide any conclusive evidence of paranormal activity. They did share stories of mysterious creatures with otherworldly eyes that shone through the dark. They also found cattle mutilations, including one that occurred in broad daylight less than an hour after they had seen the cow alive and healthy. However, on many occasions, their expensive audio and visual equipment failed to capture what several eyewitnesses had clearly seen, from large mysterious animals to flying orbs in the sky. Circleville Letters. Circleville is a city in Pickaway County, Ohio, Starting in 1977 and for nearly 20 years, anonymous letters were sent to the citizens of Circleville threatening to reveal secrets about the people that lived there. The author of these letters identified themselves as writer, and used these letters to coerce the receivers into complying with the writer's will, such as voting for the writer's preferred candidate in the county election. The writer did more than write letters though, such as an event in January of 1983 where they hung up a sign on a bus route showing obscene images of the 13-year-old daughter of bus driver Mary Gillespie. Trying to remove the sign was difficult because of a booby-trapped box with a loaded gun designed to fire if the sign was tampered with. The Gillespie family had received letters from the writer accusing her of having an affair with the school superintendent. Ronald Gillespie, husband to Mary, had also been killed under mysterious circumstances 6 years prior in August of 1977. Although the Gillespie's brother-in-law Paul Freshour was eventually sentenced for the incident depicted before, letters continued to be sent while he was imprisoned. Freshour was released in 1994, and around the same time the writer also disappeared. To this day, there is still no confirmation on the identity of the writer. Watcher House. The Watcher of Westfield, New Jersey is an anonymous individual who stalked the owners of the house at 657 Boulevard, Westfield, New Jersey from 2014 to 2017. The individual sent them multiple harassing letters signed The Watcher. The owners never moved in out of fear for their family's safety. There were 4 typewritten letters sent to the Broadduses, who bought the house, in June of 2014. The first one stated that the Watcher's family had been watching the house for generations, and also information about the children of the Broaddus family. Later letters referenced past owners, the family referred to as new blood, and detailed explanations of the house's layout. When the Broadduses contacted the police, the neighbors were the initial suspects, but there was no evidence linking them. Private investigators were also unable to identify the author. The Broadduses never moved in and sold the house in 2019. The couple who bought it from them have not been contacted by the Watcher. Kelly Hopkinsville aliens. The Hopkinsville Goblins case, or Kelly Green Men case, is a claimed encounter with aliens that occurred near Kelly in Hopkinsville, Kentucky in August of 1955. 5 adults and 7 children arrived at the Hopkinsville police station claiming that alien creatures had been attacking their farmhouse and that they had been holding them off with gunfire. The local newspaper reported that spokesmen for the crowd told of how something resembling a spaceship or flying saucer had landed at the back of the house. Men who appeared to be about 4 feet tall got out of the ship and came to the house and did battle with the occupants. One was in a tree, another was on top of the house, one pushed its face against the window. Concerned about the use of guns, 4 city police, 5 state troopers, 3 deputy sheriffs, and 4 military police drove to the farmhouse in Kelly. They found no signs of aliens, but did find signs of bullet holes and broken windows. Most of the story then got grossly misrepresented by the media, falsely bumping up the claim of how many aliens there were. The green color was added to the description, and details of large pointed ears, claw-like hands, eyes that glowed yellow, and spindly legs. It's widely agreed upon that the evening was a misidentification of natural events, such as meteors and owls, specifically great horned owls that often roamed the area and matched the description of the goblins. Murder of Andy the Goose. Andy the Footless Goose was born with stumps for feet. Andy's owner made shoes for him, which made him a local celebrity that would often make public appearances. He became so famous that he even had a guest appearance on The Tonight Show and an article in People magazine. Andy was a role model for disabled children, specifically because his owner was a member of a local charity for disabled children. Sadly, Andy was kidnapped and murdered in 1991. His body was eventually found and his shoes were still on. Andy's fans contributed $10,000 in reward money, but his murderer was never located. Beale ciphers. The Beale ciphers are a set of encrypted texts which, when solved, are supposed to reveal the location of a treasure estimated to be worth over $60 million. The ciphers have 3 texts. The first and third remain unsolved, but the second describes the content of the treasure. The ciphers come from an 1885 pamphlet titled The Beale Papers. It told of a man named Thomas J. Beale who buried this extraordinary treasure in Bedford County, Virginia in the 1820s. Beale left a box containing the ciphers to an innkeeper named Robert Morris, promising to return with the key to solve the riddles. However, he never returned, and after 23 years, Morris finally opened the box. Inside there were 2 plain text letters and several encrypted pages separated into 1, 2, and 3. Morris, unable to solve them, passed them to a friend when he died. That friend, James B. Ward, then also spent 20 years trying to decipher the message, only able to solve the second of 3. In this solved passage were details of a treasure and a general location of it. Ward then published all 3 texts in a pamphlet titled The Beale Papers. Many believe the entire story to be a hoax, arguing that the linguistic evidence demonstrates anachronisms. It's also believed that Beale was Ward himself, as their writing styles were the same. However, a Thomas Beale did exist. He lived in St. Louis in 1820, matching a claim from Morris that he sent a letter from St. Louis in 1822. Several digs have been completed at the top of Porter's Mountain, which is in the county that Beale named as the general location of his treasure. The digs have not discovered the treasure yet, and Cipher 1 and 3 remain unsolved. 2016 Clown Sightings. In 2016, there were reports of people dressing up as evil clowns and appearing in random locations. First reports were in Green Bay, Wisconsin, but it soon became a phenomenon on a global scale. Pictures of creepy clowns roaming empty parking lots, stalking people from the woods, or showing up at schools started flooding the internet and mainstream media. According to the New York Times, the clown sightings resulted in at least 12 arrests across the United States and 1 death. The incidents led Ronald McDonald to be removed from McDonald's marketing until the end of 2016. Certain places were banning the sales of clown costumes, and even Target removed its clown masks from its stores. The sightings ended by Halloween of 2016 as news outlets falsely reported a clown purge or large-scale attack from clowns that was going to happen on Halloween Eve. Not surprisingly, a large-scale attack did not happen, but a family was attacked on Halloween by a group of about 20 Floridian clowns. The original Wisconsin sighting was confirmed to be a marketing stunt for a short film titled Gags. Many believe the continued sightings was a marketing tactic for the upcoming 2017 film It, which famously stars a creepy clown that most of the costumes seem to draw inspiration from. New Line Cinema stated, however, that the movie was not involved with the clown sightings. Salish Sea Feet. Since August 20th, 2007, at least 20 detached human feet have been found on the coast of the Salish Sea in British Columbia, Canada, and Washington State in the US. Since 2007, 15 feet have been discovered in the Canadian province of British Columbia, and 5 have been found in Washington State. Of the Canadian feet, 13 of the 15 have been identified. The Washington feet also have been mostly identified. There have also been hoax feet discovered, as in 2008 a skeletonized animal paw was put in a sock and made to look as though it was a human foot. Similarly, in 2011, several running shoes with raw meat were found in British Columbia. West Virginia Coal Wars. Working and living conditions for miners throughout the 1800s and early 1900s were abysmal. Mine safety laws didn't exist in common practice, and most lived in company-owned towns that exploited its workers. So in the early 1900s, the miners formed a union titled United Mine Workers, affiliated with the American Federation of Labor. The owners of the mine companies fought back, and from 1912 until 1921, the struggles to organize workers in the coal fields sparked a series of violent episodes. The coal companies hired Baldwin Felts agents, private guards armed with rifles to guard the mines and force evictions of miners from houses they were renting. In response, a socialist party armed the miners with weapons as well. In May of 1920, a shootout in Matawan, West Virginia, between agents of the Baldwin Felts and local miners, who later joined the United Mine Workers of America, sparked what became known as the Battle of Blair Mountain, the largest insurrection in the United States since the American Civil War. Although about 500 miners were convicted of murder and treason for their participation in the Battle of Blair Mountain, they received widespread media support for their cause. Sadly, it did not lead to any benefit, as the UMW lost about half its membership between 1921 and 1924. Sioux City UFO. In January of 1951, a cigar-shaped straight-winged aircraft was spotted over Sioux City, Iowa. The initial sighting comes from 2 DC-3 pilots named Captain Larry Vinther and Jim Bachmeyer. After seeing the mystery plane blink its lights, Vinther spoke into the radio, asking the pilot of the unidentified plane to again blink his lights. Vinther reported that the light blinked a second time. Vinther described its wings as absolutely straight, which was thought to be impossible, and larger than a B-29. Vinther also told the press that the craft passed by them, then instantly turned around to go the same direction they were flying, a feat no plane could do. The sighting made national news as Flying Magazine published the first-hand account from Vinther. The Air Force's official response came in a book released by Project Blue Book chief Edward J. Ruppelt, where they attributed the sighting to a B-36 in the area. However, even he had skepticism about the piloting maneuver that Vinther and Bachmeyer claimed the UFO had done. The Leatherman. The Leatherman was an unidentified vagabond known for his handmade leather suit. He regularly traveled a 365-mile route between the Connecticut River and Hudson River from 1857 to 1889. He's believed to be French-Canadian as he was fluent in the French language and had a French prayer book on his body at his death. The Leatherman famously occupied multiple rock shelters, now called Leatherman Caves, on his travels between different towns along his loop. The man only knew broken English and communicated in mostly grunts and gestures. He became so reliable and popular that people would have food ready for him, and was even exempt from Connecticut's tramp law, an anti-homelessness law that made it a criminal offense. The Leatherman died from mouth cancer and was found in March of 1889 in a cave he frequented in Sawmill Woods, Mount Pleasant, New York. His grave in the Sparta Cemetery in New York simply reads, The Leatherman. Bridgewater Triangle and Hockomock. The Bridgewater Triangle, similar to the Bermuda Triangle, is an area in Massachusetts with claims to paranormal activities and creature sightings. The triangle covers approximately 200 square miles, with its points being in Rehoboth, Freetown, and Abington. Bridgewater State University and Taunton State Hospital are also within the triangle, and both have claims of buildings and rooms haunted by ghosts. Most famously, Hockomock Swamp, a large wetland, served as a base of operations for King Philip to launch assaults upon nearby English settlements. The word Hockomock in the Algonquin language means place where spirits dwell, and is closely related to Hobomok, the spirit of death and disease in Wampanoag mythology. The swamp is also home to many creatures, such as giant snakes, Bigfoot, and thunderbirds. Dogpatch, USA. Dogpatch, USA was an amusement park in Arkansas based on the Lil Abner comic strip created by Al Capp. The town of Marble Falls changed its name officially to Dogpatch to help promote the park. The name was changed back in 1997. The park operated from 1968 until its closure in 1993. In 1972, after Jess Odom bought the controlling share of the park, he built a winter sports complex overlooking Dogpatch in order to have a year-round park. This pursuit, alongside the end of the Lil Abner comic strip in 1977, led to a loss in revenue for the park. Because of poor interest rates, the resort and park were unable to turn a profit. It was even considered to be changed to a religious-themed God's Patch, but those plans never made it far. The park declared bankruptcy in November of 1980, where Ozark Entertainment purchased and operated only the Dogpatch amusement park until 1987, when it too was sold to another company named Telcor. Its last year open was in 1993, as the next year it was sold to Westech Corp and Leisure Tech, who never made any plans for reopening the park. Jonathan Luna. Jonathan Luna was a 38-year-old attorney out of Baltimore, Maryland. The morning of December 5, 2003, he was found dead, stabbed 36 times with his own pocket knife, and drowned in a creek in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The night before, his travels were traceable through credit card purchases and E-ZPass toll tickets. At 11:38 p.m., Luna drove from the Baltimore courthouse northeast into Delaware. At 12:57, $200 was withdrawn near Newark, Delaware. At 2:47 a.m., he crossed the Delaware River toll bridge to the PA Turnpike, and at 3:20 a.m. his card was used to buy gas near King of Prussia. At 4:04, Luna's car exited the turnpike. Luna then parked his car at the back of the Sensenig and Weaver Well Drilling Company, where it was then driven into the creek. Around 5:30 that morning, a worker noticed the car and later Luna's body face down in the creek. The FBI determined that Luna's death was self-inflicted, and that he had been alone from when he left his office until his body was found. However, 2 coroners ruled the death a homicide. Evidence collected did find a second blood type and partial prints. Luna also reportedly left his glasses, which he needed to drive, and cell phone in his Baltimore desk. Finally, a pool of blood in the back seat led detectives to believe that Luna was actually in the back seat while someone else drove. In 2020, a Lancaster newspaper requested that the coroner's records be unsealed, but a judge stated that releasing the records posed a threat of substantially hindering or jeopardizing the open, active, and ongoing criminal investigation into the death of Jonathan Luna. Disappearance of the Witchcraft Boat. The Witchcraft Boat was a 23-foot yacht owned by Florida real estate developer Daniel Burak. He was out with his friend on the night of December 22, 1967. The two were about a mile off from the coast of Miami, right within the infamous Bermuda Triangle, when the Witchcraft suddenly lost functionality. Barak put a call out for a tow back to port, but emphasized that their situation was not an emergency. Only 19 minutes later, the Coast Guard arrived at the reported location, but there was no signs of the ship. No debris, no scraps, as though the ship disappeared completely off the face of the earth. Many use this disappearance as an example and validation of the Bermuda Triangle's reputation. Ronald Tamman. Ronald Tamman was a sophomore at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. The last time he was seen was 8 p.m. on Sunday, April 19, 1953, as he went to get new bed linen from the hall manager. At 10:30 p.m., Tamman's roommate returned to their room to find his psychology book open on his desk and all the room lights turned on. The roommate assumed Tamman was spending the night in the fraternity house. It was only when Tamman failed to return the following day that the roommate became worried and a search for the missing student began. A woman in the nearby town reported someone matching Tamman's description had knocked on her door the morning of April 20th, asking for bus stop directions. Fisher Hall was demolished in 1978, but there was no traces of him in the ruins. To this day, no body has ever been recovered and no one knows what happened to him. Since his disappearance, Ronald Tamman has been dubbed the Phantom of Oxford. Jacob Ade family murders. The Ade family, including Jacob, Pauline, Lizzie, and Henry, as well as a neighbor named Rosa Moira, were discovered in March of 1897, recovered in a horribly burned condition. The Ade house was discovered on fire the night of March 24th by a neighbor. As he approached the house, a wall collapsed and he was able to see their bodies inside. With a pitchfork, the neighbor was able to pull 4 of them from the house. The sheriff's theory was that the murderer knocked on the door, and when Jacob opened it, the murderer whacked him with an axe. Pauline moved toward the door either at the same time as Jacob or soon after to aid her husband, and down she went. Then, when the murderer came into the room to take care of the children, Rosa was able to run behind him and get out of the house. After the aides were dead and the house was covered in coal and oil and set aflame, Rosa was recaptured, hacked to death, and then thrown back into the burning house. The murderer was never caught. Kenny Veach. Kenny Veach, a YouTuber by the name of Snakebit McGee, an experienced hiker, famously went missing after exploring an M-shaped cave near Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Kenny's disappearance has grown from a grim local interest story to becoming by far the most talked about lost person case in the entire desert region. Veach had claimed to have hiked a plethora of different cave systems and mountains in the area known as the Mojave Desert. In 2014, Veach commented on a video titled Son of Area 51 Technician, where he described a strange experience he had while hiking the desert near Area 51. He discovered a cave shaped like the letter M that, as he got closer and closer, made his body shake. He made a second trip in October, this time recording and posting it as a video to his YouTube channel titled M Cave Hike. In November, Veach embarked on another journey to the cave. He informed his girlfriend that he was going to the cave again, but he never came back. Because of the region Veach disappeared in, outlandish theories about military involvement with his disappearance have sprung up. However, the most simple explanation is an accidental death caused by a level of unpreparedness, or simply that he went into the cave and became stuck. Michael Myring. Michael Myring was a South African citizen who moved to California in the 1990s. He eventually started a business named Perusia International Trading and used the Evergreen Hotel in Davao City in the Philippines for its business records. He was also among a group of treasure hunters looking for Yamashita's lost treasure. On December 14, 2001, Myring, now 67 years old, checked into the Evergreen Hotel and was reported to have 2 heavy metal boxes. Myring would repeatedly tell the staff that when cleaning his room, they could touch anything but the 2 padlocked metal boxes which allegedly contained assorted documents, and that they should use only a clean rag without any chemical materials. On May 16, 2002, an explosion occurred from Myring's hotel room, enough to cause severe damage to his leg that it had to eventually be amputated. Myring initially reported that a man had thrown a grenade into his room. Inside the hotel room, an ID card with Myring's information on it for the Moro International Liberation Front was found. The front was a splinter ground for the Muslim independence movement in the Philippines. It was also confirmed that Myring had been being monitored because of frequently moving boxes to and from the hotel. There are other theories, including CIA involvement, as another explosion in General Santos City made many believe that Myring was part of an operation designed to force the Philippine government to give American authorities greater influence in the area. Lover's Lane Murders. On August 22, 1990, Cheryl Henry and Andy Atkinson were on a date, heading from a nightclub and going to a then remote area known as Lover's Lane off Enclave Parkway near Eldridge Park in West Houston. Cheryl's family called police the next morning, reporting that she never came home. A security guard found the white car that Andy owned with Cheryl's purse and shoes still inside. Search dogs were able to locate Cheryl's and Andy's bodies. Andy was tied to a tree and nearly decapitated. Golf balls and clubs pointed to Cheryl's body, found naked under wooden boards. Although there were some leads in the investigation, the identity of the killer is still a mystery. Lost children of the Alleghenies. On April 24, 1856, two children named George and Joseph Cox, aged 7 and 5 respectively, went missing from their home after wandering off into the woods. A large search party was organized to look for the missing boys. Meanwhile, a local farmer named Jacob Dibbert informed his wife and brother-in-law that he had been having a recurring dream in which he found the bodies of the boys in a ravine after passing a dead deer, a child's shoe, and a fallen birch tree. He convinced his brother-in-law to go out searching with him to see if the dream was truly prophetic. Lo and behold, they found the bodies of the boys in a location that matched perfectly with the details from his dream. The children appeared to have died due to starvation and the elements. A monument was raised in the exact spot where they were found. Theories and speculations surround their deaths and Dibbert's prophetic dream, but no further explanation has ever been discovered. Melon heads. In the American folklore of Ohio, Michigan, and Connecticut, melon heads are beings generally described as large-headed humanoids with bulbous large craniums who occasionally emerge from hiding places to attack people. Different variations of the legend attribute different origins to the entities. In Michigan, the melon heads were said to be children with hydrocephalus that, after being abused at an insane asylum near Lake Town, became feral and were released into the woods. Variations of the story from Ohio and Connecticut are relatively similar, sometimes involving an orphanage run by a mad scientist who experimented on the children to create the melon heads. Dead Man's Hole. Dead Man's Hole is the name of a cave in Burnett County, Texas. The hole, originally discovered by an entomologist in 1821, was eventually used as a dumping grounds for up to 17 bodies during the Civil War. Anti-Union vigilantes would murder Union sympathizers and throw their bodies into the 15-story hole. After the bones were collected for a proper burial, the bones disappeared and have never been found. Pegasus and the Youth International Party. Pegasus was a 145-pound pig that was nominated for President of the United States by the Youth International Party in August of 1968. The Youth International Party, also known as Yippies, were a group of counterculture revolutionaries. Pegasus actually even held a campaign as he was taken to a rally where he was officially nominated for president. Pegasus was in the middle of reading an acceptance speech being read by Jerry Rubin as he was arrested by the police alongside 7 other Yippies. After this arrest, Pegasus was sent to an anti-cruelty society along with a sow called Mrs. Pegasus. Room 1046 Mystery. The Room 1046 Mystery is about a man named Artemis Ogletree, who was stabbed to death. The name of the mystery comes from his stay at the Hotel President in Kansas City, Missouri. The story goes, Ogletree checked into the hotel on January 2nd, 1935. That evening, a maid named Mary Skoptic accidentally walked in on him with the shades drawn and one lamp on. Later, she walked in again and saw him lying on the bed with a note that read, "Don, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." She walked in the next morning and again he was in the same spot as the night before. He answered the phone while she was in the room speaking to Don. Later that day, when Skoptic returned, she heard 2 men arguing. Later that night, Ogletree was apparently seen outside the hotel asking for a taxi. On the morning of January 4th, Ogletree had requested a wake-up call, and when a bellhop went to his room, he was found naked and drunk on the bed. Another bellhop came in at 10:30 that same morning, and Ogletree was found on his hands and knees with his head bleeding. When taken to the hospital, doctors determined that Ogletree had a cord wrapped around his neck, wrists, and ankles, and that he had been stabbed. He died of his wounds at the hospital. Because of Ogletree's alias, his body and funeral also caused confusion. Multiple people misidentified him as a relative, but one caller sent money in to delay the funeral and have him buried near his sister. Eventually, he was identified by his mother, Ruby Ogletree. The mystery continued as Ruby reported that she had received letters from Artemis after his death. One was from Chicago, 2 from New York stating he was going to Europe, and a telephone call from Tennessee wherein the caller stated Artemis had helped him in Egypt, where he was now living. None of these travels, especially overseas, were accounted for under the name of Artemis Ogletree. In 1937, a man named Joseph Martin was arrested on a murder charge, and it was found that one of his aliases was Donald Kelso, and his handwriting had matched samples from the letters written to Ruby Ogletree. However, Martin was never charged for the murder. The 3X Murders. The 3X Murders refers to a series of murders that occurred in the 1930s. The killer, self-titled 3X by his own anonymous letters to the police, was targeting couples in Queens, New York. The first victim was Joseph Mazinski, when his body was found alongside a woman's coat. The coat belonged to Catherine May, who was having an affair with Mazinski at the time of the murder. 3X gave a letter to May with Mazinski's name written on it in red ink. After killing Mazinski, a letter was also sent to the New York newspaper, boasting about the murder and claiming he would kill again. This letter was signed with an inverted and underlined V and the symbol 3X. After this letter, a man named Noel Sowley was shot and killed while on a date with Betty Ring. She was the daughter of a police officer and later gave a graphic retelling of the murder. Again, like May, Ring was given a letter with Sowley's name and a circled 3X. Ring and Sowley, like Mazinski and May, were also having a secret affair. The 3X killer also sent letters to police, threatening them and threatening to commit more murders. Some letters were personally delivered to cops, including things such as, "I was watching you clean your gun last night." 3X's last official letter was received on October 22, 1931. Like others, it was another threat to kill in the area, but no other letters were received after this. In 1936, someone did confess to the crimes, but both May and Ring were brought in and said he was definitely not the murderer due to the discrepancy in age, as the man who confessed was far younger than the murderer. No one else ever confessed or was caught for these murders, which makes them an eerily similar predecessor to the Zodiac Killer. Flooded towns. The 20th century saw an increase in technological developments, one of them being the harnessing of hydroelectric power. The building of large dams involved the rerouting of major water sources towards a man-made basin. This rerouting would occasionally pave directly over whole towns filled with people forced to leave. For example, the residents of St. Thomas, Nevada, had to move to make way for the construction of the Boulder Dam, which would later become the famous Hoover Dam. This led to the existence of submerged ghost towns across the American West. When the water levels in these basins lower, you can literally see the remains of submerged structures beneath the water. Bohemian Grove. The Bohemian Grove is a gentleman's club in Monterey, California, founded in 1878 by the Bohemian Club. It spans 2,700 acres in the redwood forests where only members and their guests are allowed to visit. The Grove is home to an annual encampment where members come together to party and observe rituals sacred to the club. More than a local club, the Grove has hosted many influential figures, many of them members, including presidents, politicians, musicians, actors, and more. It became such a hub for the meeting and collaboration of influential minds that the planning meeting for the Manhattan Project took place there in September of 1942. The Grove gets its name from the term bohemian, which refers to a particularly eclectic individual, typically an artist or intellectual, who retreats from normal society and trades conformity for the pursuit of artistic or philosophical goals. The club began as a group of these so-called bohemians, but was eventually managed and expanded by businessmen from San Francisco. The club has a number of rituals and symbols attached to it. The patron saint of the club is John of Nepomuk, a saint associated with a legend about his death being ordered by a king for refusing to divulge the secrets of the king's unfaithful wife. This fits into the club's motto, "Weaving spiders come not here," referring to the exclusion of outside ties and influences. The main symbol of the Grove, however, is a large owl allegedly meant to symbolize wisdom. A statue of this owl stands at the head of the lake at the Grove, containing audio equipment inside it, which for a period of time played a recording of club member Walter Cronkite as the voice of the owl during the cremation of care ceremony. This ceremony, which is performed in front of the owl, is meant to represent the banishing of worldly cares for the club members. Alex Jones infamously infiltrated the Grove in July of 2000 and recorded footage of the cremation of care ritual, which was shown in his documentary Dark Secrets Inside Bohemian Grove. In the extremely creepy video, the ceremony is shown to be filled with strange chanting, laughter, and fiery spectacles. Jones characterized it as a ritual sacrifice and claimed that it was a child sacrifice performed with a doll in place of a real child. While members and attendees claim the Grove is nothing more than a gentleman's club that acts as a getaway spot for influential folks, others insist that the nature of the Grove and the events held there are far more sinister. Montauk Project. The Montauk Project was a series of alleged experiments conducted by the United States government at Montauk Air Force Station in New York in the 1970s. The experiments, said to be an extension of the Philadelphia experiment, were aimed at developing psychological warfare techniques and exotic research, including time travel. Information about these experiments come largely from a book written by Preston B. Nichols and Peter Moon, titled The Montauk Project: Experiments in Time. In the book, Nichols and Moon write from a first-person perspective about a number of extraordinary claims, including, but not limited to, the abduction of local homeless people subjected to electromagnetic radiation, psychic abilities enhanced to the point where people could materialize objects out of thin air, teleportation experiments, the creation of a fully functional time and space travel machine, contact with aliens that destroyed equipment and ate researchers, and mind control on runaway boys. The book went on to be the first in a series, which expanded the lore into including such things as the project collaborating with the moon landing hoax, the birth of the Jersey Devil, and the creation of the AIDS virus. Oh, and Nikola Tesla, whose death was apparently faked, was director of operations at Montauk Air Force Station. Needless to say, this one is pretty wild. The book and its stories partially inspired the Netflix series Stranger Things, with Montauk even being used as a working title for the show at one point. Dulce Base. Dulce Base is the name of an alleged underground base beneath the Archuleta Mesa near Dulce, New Mexico, that was operated by humans and gray aliens. The claims originate from an Albuquerque businessman named Paul Benowitz, who became convinced that he was intercepting electromagnetic communications from alien spacecraft and installations outside of Albuquerque. He claimed to have discovered the underground installation in the 1980s. By the late 80s, his legend had been solidified in the UFOologist community. Accounts about the base made by other writers, however, were full of embellishments. The story even reached the grocery store tabloid Weekly World News, which quoted UFOologist Leonard H. Stringfield as a source for its claims, who, upon hearing about the article, said, "I never read such a distortion of facts in my life." The stories also bear a striking resemblance to the tales of a man named Richard Shaver, who, in the 1940s, wrote to the science fiction editor Raymond A. Palmer regarding evil underground aliens called Deros, who piloted flying saucers. People also speculate that the story surrounding Dulce Base may have been inspired by the very real underground missile installations in the area. Even so, residents of Dulce have actually reported UFO sightings, and as recently as 2016, there was a Dulce Base UFO conference held at a casino hotel in Dulce. New Coke Conspiracy. In the mid-1980s, while Coca-Cola and Pepsi were in the throes of the so-called Cola Wars, the Coke company decided to deploy a unique marketing strategy to launch them ahead of Pepsi. They experimented to create a cola that was better than both Coke and Pepsi, and then released it branded as New Coke. Immediate public outrage ensued as people demanded the return of the old Coke formula, seeing the change and discontinuation of classic Coke as an insult to the product so uniquely tied to American culture. Coca-Cola brought Classic Coke back into production, and they quickly overtook Pepsi as the most popular soft drink once again. The theory goes that Coke did this entirely on purpose in order to create a larger demand for their original product. By removing it from the market and replacing it with something new, they made the public realize how much they loved Coke and caused sales to surpass Pepsi once it was restored. When confronted with this idea, Coca-Cola's president remarked, "Some critics will say Coca-Cola made a marketing mistake. Some cynics will say that we planned the whole thing. The truth is, we are not that dumb, and we are not that smart." JFK Theories. This entry acts as an umbrella for the whole mass of conspiracy theories surrounding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963. The official narrative provided by the Warren Commission stated that the president was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald, who acted alone without the aid of or conspiring with others. This has hardly been accepted with generosity on the part of many Americans who have posited many theories about what really happened. Theories include, firstly, a deep mistrust in the government's report reflected in allegations against the commission of tampering with evidence, intimidating witnesses, and foul play. Whatever the specific doubts may be, the uniting issue is the belief that Oswald did not act alone. Theories often posit that there were multiple shooters at the plaza, and even that the assassination was part of a much larger conspiracy. The CIA, Secret Service, Soviet government, and even specific people such as Lyndon B. Johnson or George H.W. Bush have all been accused of being behind the attack. Polling data from recent years concluded that over half of all Americans doubt that Oswald acted alone in killing the president. Philadelphia Experiment and USS Eldridge. Both of these entries refer to an alleged incident, also known as Project Rainbow, that occurred in late October 1943 in the U.S. Navy's Philadelphia shipyard. A man named Carl M. Allen claimed to have witnessed the USS Eldridge disappear and reappear from thin air. While there are several versions of the story, the general idea is that scientists were experimenting with the electromagnetic field and caused the ship to not only disappear from sight, but to teleport to Norfolk, Virginia, before returning to port in Philadelphia. Some versions of the legend include the fact that upon rematerialization in Philadelphia, sailors aboard the USS Eldridge had their bodies fused into parts of the ship, with some rematerializing inside out and others vanishing entirely. While there is actually no evidence for this ever happening, the US Navy Online Library does have an entry about this where they write, "After many years of searching, the staff of the archives and independent researchers have not located any official documents that support the assertion that an invisibility or teleportation experiment involving a Navy ship occurred at Philadelphia or at any other location." For the sake of the YouTube algorithm, this entry is going to be heavily redacted. Basically, this one is about a movement based around the information revealed by a source or sources claiming to be members of the US government with information about what is going on behind the scenes throughout the world and in politics. The movement, named after the 17th letter of the alphabet and the anonymous whistleblower source, gained massive popularity online through platforms like Twitter and Facebook. It peaked in popularity and influence during the 2020 election, but has since lost traction. Those who are familiar with this one know why I have to speak about it so loosely. If you are confused and want more information, you can see the original iceberg chart image, which is listed in the description below. Denver International Airport. The Denver International Airport is believed by some to be the headquarters of the Illuminati. Due to the strange art, unusual architecture, and theories about its difficult construction process, theories have become popular online surrounding the suspicious and mysterious nature of the airport. Theories include secret tunnels under the airport that lead to elite bunkers and lizard people dwellings. Statues such as the horse with red glowing eyes or the various gargoyles around the airport also contribute to the overall creepiness of the complex. The airport has leaned heavily into these theories, and at one point even installed a talking gargoyle statue that would literally play audio saying, "Welcome to the Illuminati headquarters. I mean, Denver International Airport." While representatives insist that this was intended as a lighthearted jab at the theories, others suggest all of these symbols represent that the New World Order is hiding in plain sight at the Denver International Airport. NBA frozen envelope theory. This theory posits that during the 1985 NBA draft lottery, NBA Commissioner David Stern rigged the lottery so that the New York Knicks would receive Patrick Ewing. The lottery system involved a random drawing of 7 envelopes from a hopper. In each of these envelopes were the logos of the 7 non-playoff teams, the first of which would be allowed to have the first pick for players. The frozen envelope theory suggests that the lottery envelope containing the New York Knicks logo was chilled so that it could be identified by touch. Stern appears to hesitate before drawing the envelope, making many believe that he was attempting to sense if it was, in fact, the chilled one. Hangar 18. Hangar 18 is the name of a hangar at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that supposedly held the remains of aliens recovered from a crash in Aztec, New Mexico in 1948. The claims originated from a science fiction writer named Robert Spencer Carr, who claimed on a radio interview the above information. After his claims gained media attention, the Air Force publicly denied the claims. Over time, Carr's story grew more and more outlandish, including the detail that a nurse witnessed an alien autopsy. Carr's own son eventually came out and said that his father was a habitual liar who often mortified my mother and me by spinning preposterous stories in front of strangers. There was no evidence to support the claims about Hangar 18. Kirtland UFO. The Kirtland UFO sighting occurred on November 4th, 1957, at around 10:45 in the evening at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. 2 tower controllers claimed to have seen a light flying across the airfield. The men described the object as around 15 to 20 feet tall, vertically elongated and egg-shaped, with a single white light in its base. It came closer to the tower and hovered for around a minute, and then flew away at high speed into the clouds. The men were able to contact the Albuquerque Radar Approach Control Unit, who confirmed the object's very fast and unusual movements for around 20 minutes until it disappeared from the radar. The Air Force believed that the men had actually seen something, but concluded that it must have been a confused pilot attempting to land at Kirtland before realizing that they were in the wrong area and flying away. The same excuse was parroted in the Air Force-funded Condon Committee on UFOs, published in 1968. Despite the official narrative, the witnesses were emphatic in stressing that it in no way resembled an aircraft. Project Serpo. This entry refers to a theory that states the US government conducted an exchange program with aliens from the planet Serpo in the Zeta Reticuli star system. The story goes that after the Roswell UFO crash, the US began contact with an alien race from Serpo and sent American military personnel to the planet between the years of 1965 and 1978. There is literally no proof for this theory besides the UFO conspiracy theorists saying that it happened. Gorman Encounter. George Gorman was a fighter pilot in the Second World War who went on to serve in the North Dakota National Guard. During a night flight on October 1st, 1948, he noticed a flying object that was not being tracked by the local air traffic control tower. When flying towards it to investigate, the object, which he described as a ball of light, flew directly over his plane in a near collision. After several more head-on passes, he continued to pursue the object until 9:27 that night before it disappeared into the horizon. Upon investigation, the Air Force initially speculated that Gorman had actually had an encounter with an atomic-powered object. However, they eventually came to the conclusion that Gorman was at first chasing a weather balloon that had been confirmed to be in the area at the time, whose movements would have appeared highly exaggerated due to Gorman's own erratic flight pattern. After the balloon left his sight, they posited that Gorman had mistakenly identified the planet Jupiter in the sky as the UFO and was obviously unable to catch up with it as the source of the light. While some hold on to the story as a genuine UFO encounter, others have admitted that the official explanation is valid and that the story does not hold any real water. Mantell Incident. The Mantell Incident is said to have occurred on January 7, 1948. Captain Thomas F. Mantell of the Kentucky Air National Guard died after losing consciousness due to high altitude and crashing while pursuing a UFO. Incredible embellishments of the story were published immediately after the incident, painting it as a mysterious and sinister attack from aliens. However, the incident has since been explained as an encounter with an Operation Skyhook balloon, which would not have been known about at the time. The descriptions of the UFO match up with these Skyhook balloons, and the incident has since been largely deemed as a complete mistake. DC UFOs. This entry seems to most likely be referring to multiple incidents that occurred from July 12th to July 29th, 1952, where unidentified flying objects were reported over Washington, D.C. The first sighting occurred on the night of July 19th, where an air traffic controller named Edward Nugent reported 7 objects in an area with no known aircraft. Harry Barnes, the senior air traffic controller, had 2 other members perform checks on Nugent's radar and then contacted another radar-equipped control tower. The controllers there also had the objects on their radar and saw a hovering bright light in the sky, which departed with incredible speed. Other objects started to appear all over the radars, moving over the Capitol. Barnes contacted the local Air Force base, which reported no unusual objects on their radars. However, Airman William Brady stated that he saw an object which appeared to be like an orange ball of fire trailing a tail. As he tried to alert other personnel, it took off at an unbelievable speed. These were not the only people who had seen the July 19th sighting, as a pilot from Capital Airlines waiting in their cockpit and other Air Force members at the base witnessed the objects in the sky. The original belief from the head of Project Blue Book, the Air Force's lead investigators for UFO sightings, was that it was unusual weather conditions that caused the radars to act unusually. The next major sightings happened on the night of July 26th. Radars at National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base had unknown objects appear. This time, it correlated to a National Airlines flight, and the pilot and stewardess reported lights above their craft. An Air Force Master Sergeant also reported seeing the lights in the sky. By 11:30 p.m., 2 Air Force jets were directed to fly towards the blips. One pilot reported seeing nothing, however the other saw 4 white glows that he tried to make contact with, but ceased chasing them because he saw no chance of overtaking them. The press conference that followed was the largest Pentagon press conference since World War II, but it reported that the incidents again were either weather phenomenon or aerial phenomenon such as stars or meteors, and that they posed an actual threat to national security. Ultimately, this was overturned as military officials believed false UFO sightings could be used to create mass hysteria and open the US to an attack. Phantom social workers. This is referring to a surge of media reports in the 1990s where, over the UK and US, fake social workers would show up to houses with goals of kidnapping children. It is speculated that these social workers were actually a group of individuals taking it upon themselves to investigate apparent child abuse victims, but to this day no one is quite sure. Havana Syndrome. Havana syndrome is the name of an anomalous health condition brought on by unknown factors such as severe headaches, dizziness, blurred vision, tinnitus, and vertigo. The name of the syndrome comes from the events at the US Embassy in Havana, Cuba, in 2016, where diplomats reported hearing strange grating noises coming from a specific direction, described as pressure, vibration, or a sensation comparable to driving a car with the window partly rolled down. The State Department determined that diplomats were either attacked deliberately with a sound device or were somehow exposed in a way that caused them to suffer these very severe symptoms. Although no one has ever been directly blamed for the attacks, 2 Cuban diplomats were expelled by the State Department. The Cuban government denied any involvement in these alleged sonic attacks. Havana syndrome, or at least symptoms comporting with it, have not been isolated to Havana. Reports of American diplomats experiencing Havana syndrome have come from Russia, Poland, Taiwan, Australia, China, and even in Washington, D.C. To this day, there has been no confirmed explanation for this phenomenon, and theorists continue to speculate that some kind of sonic weapon is being used to cause the illness. Prussian scheme. After the failure of the United States' first constitution, known as the Articles of Confederation, the country was in desperate need of a new system. As the Founding Fathers met to draft the next constitution, rumors began to circulate that the idea of adopting a king from Europe was being entertained. Allegedly, a delegate to the Continental Congress named Nathaniel Gorham corresponded with Prince Henry of Prussia, inviting him to be the new monarch of the United States. The story was for a long time considered a myth, but an unsent draft of a letter written by Prince Henry was found in Prussian archives in the early 20th century. The letter refers to a vague proposal the prince had received, substantially similar to that detailed in the original story. In it, Henry reports that he is not interested in an American crown, but suggests that a French candidate would be better. To this day, it is unknown exactly what happened and how legitimate the rumor really was. It is interesting, however, to imagine how different history might have been had something like the Prussian scheme come to fruition. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you